This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. At our Military History Night of May the 22nd, Arthur Brook Bangsboll told the remarkable story of his dad, Leif, who had a series of extraordinary adventures in his lifetime, culminating in his being dropped into Denmark as an OSS operative during World War II. Over to you, James and Brook.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's Military History Night. I'm the event chair, James Ellis. Before I welcome tonight's speaker to the podium, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that this month is the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. Sadly, most of those who lived through and fought in that conflict are no longer with us, including all those that I had the great privilege to know and work with and help share their stories in a variety of television documentaries, digital projects, and oral history testimonies. Their absence only deepens the responsibility we now all have to keep their memories alive and their experiences known to future generations. So with that said, it feels especially appropriate in this anniversary month that tonight's presentation is about the life of a remarkable Second World War veteran, a man whose experiences during that conflict are so extraordinary and compelling that they might sound like the stuff of fiction. But as you'll hear from his son, these events unfold not in a novel, but in real life. Our speaker this evening joined the US Army after finishing high school here in Toronto. Upon completion of the United States Military Academy Preparatory College, which is affiliated with West Point, he returned to Canada and ultimately pursued a military career with the Canadian Armed Forces. He has a bachelor's degree from York University in Economics and Political Science, a master's degree from the Royal Military College of Canada in War Studies, and is a graduate of the United States Air Force's Command and Staff College. He is currently the Executive Director of the Royal Canadian Air Force Association, located in Ottawa. Please give a very warm hand to Brook Bangsboll.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us this evening here at the Royal Canadian Military Institute. And for you that are not military, we abbreviate everything, so that's RCMI. That's how we refer to it. So thank you again for joining us. It is my pleasure to present to you tonight just a glimpse of the story about a very interesting man, a man who had many identities, many ranks, many titles, but the one I know him as was Dad. But the one you're going to know him about is quite interesting and quite dynamic. So I'm not going to tell you the story. I'm not going to go through each of the chapters. I'm just going to give you a few tidbits about some of the interesting things he did and happened to him during his career, and we'll see what goes from there. I'd like to also acknowledge all my friends and family that are here today. I appreciate you coming out and supporting me. It is interesting. I see a number of friends that I went to school with. I don't know if you are aware of it, but I grew up here in Toronto and went to George S. Vanier up in North York, and a few of my Vikings are here. And it makes me think about I returned to standing in a podium and speaking in front of people, which I did hundreds of times in the military, but it's different here, and it's different because I'm going to be talking in front of some friends that I haven't really talked to in a forum like this for years. In fact, I think it was in grade 7 at the science fair was the last time I talked to these guys, and I remember I was making an electrical current out of a potato and trying to explain that, and then I remember getting a C- for it. So the bottom line is, at the end of the presentation, there'll be questions and answers, but I will not be accepting any questions from any of that gang. So just keep it to yourself. Okay, so look at this. The first slide in my presentation, I'm quoting myself. How unabashedly shameful is that? But hey, I'm up at the podium, that's what I can do. So anyhow, that statement is actually very, very important to the theme of this book, because as I walk through the history of how this book came to be, it really was about learning about a person that was my father, but I learned about a person that I didn't really know, because I didn't realize when I was growing up, that's the kind of guy he was in his past. It was very hidden. So it was mesmerizing as a kid, as some of the stories I'll tell you about. As I grew up, sometimes it was a little skeptical. I'm going to talk about a story where my great-grandfather's name was Revolver Sorensen. That's very cool to have a grandparent with a nickname like Revolver Sorensen. That's cool. But as I grew up and got older, I went, is that really true? Well, I'll explain later, but it was. So growing up in a family that, our heritage is Danish, so Scandinavian. So the passage of family history is oral. So whenever we would have virtually every dinner, my dad would start talking about family history. If it was a big dinner like Christmas or Thanksgiving, it would be a lecture about things that happened in our past and in his past. And if it was a special event, you would get an extra couple of stories being told. And my brother Chris, who's here today, he'll attest to this. Once you've heard the story 1,000 times, you don't need to hear it again. So you're sitting at the table, I'm sitting there with my 4 siblings, and as soon as Dad would start to gear up into one of his stories, we would look at each other and we'd all start rolling our eyes saying, well, we're not going to be going out playing ball hockey this afternoon. We're here for the duration. But the interesting thing was, after being told these stories over and over and over again, they become rote, and you learn that it's a pretty amazing story. But I'll be honest with you, while I was doing the research of this book, I learned a couple of stories that I had no idea that had happened, and it was just very fortunate that my older brothers had been told by my dad, and he, I guess, tried to just keep it from me because it might have been a little bit of a shocking story that happened in combat. But I learned some amazing things, so it's a fun experience, and I'm hoping you'll enjoy it with me. So here we go. So over the next 60 minutes or so, I plan to give you a glimpse into some of the profoundly important moments, not only in my dad's life, but in the process of writing this book. Things that I learned that I thought were either not true or couldn't be true, and they end up being true. And it helped me develop the storyline to what ended up being this wonderful book. I won't spoil the book by telling you all the stories, so I'm just going to let you hear a few of the eureka moments that occurred. Many of the stories are about life and death. Some are just beautiful stories about a young man finding his way in life. A bit of a warning, as the book progresses, life's military career evolves and becomes entangled in a clandestine world of secret agents. He will adopt many different ranks, many different titles. He will have various aliases. It is confusing at times. So when I'm talking about Lieutenant Bangsboll, who's actually Agent Hudson, who turns into Agent Beck, it's a bit of like juggling cats, but that's the story. I got to tell it the way it is. So born Leif Bangsboll, no middle name. From birth, he was affectionately known by his father as Jokum. At the age of 13, he became seaman apprentice in the Danish Navy, then was promoted to sailor first class, then took a left-hand turn and became flight sergeant in the Norwegian Air Force. Then he was a lieutenant in the U.S. Army. And then finally, an OSS agent, where he's become known as Alexander Hudson, and eventually as Jorgen Beck, OSS field agent. So that's a mouthful of different identities to try to keep track of. And it's one thing for me to write it, and I feel bad for you that had to read it, because it's tough. It's tough to follow the bouncing ball, but it's all true. And then in typical fashion of my father's mysterious life, it does not end there with just those titles. During my research into the book, I came upon an old love letter that he'd received from a woman named Frances, written in 1944. The letter was addressed to Leif Johansson. I don't know. So, it's just the way he was. So, that's what we're going to cover over the next 60 minutes or so. The interesting artifacts, the show and tell are right up here. I'll touch on a few of them during the speech, but afterwards I can talk to each of them individually if you wish. Okay, so this is what I'm not going to be talking about. And this is I'm kind of fishing here just to let you know these are some of the interesting stories that I'm not going to tell you. So, Leif attended Adolf Hitler's 50th birthday party in Berlin, the 20th of April, 1939. I don't know a lot of people who can say they did that. Operation Dynamo, for those of you who don't know, that's the miracle at Dunkirk. He just happened to be, again, at the right place at the right time, and he got to participate in that. Escape and evasion test. Very proud of it that he has the best record of any agent that went through Camp X. And I don't know if you're all aware, but Camp X is right down the Highway 401, just outside of Whitby, Ontario. He had an attack on the Gestapo headquarters in Aarhus, Denmark in 44, a train sabotage in 44, rail yard sabotage in 45, and the last one, and that's one of the ones he did not talk to me about much, was eliminating 2 collaborators, traitors, in 1944 and 1945. So those are stories you're not going to hear about tonight, so too bad. You have to read the book. So, like any great story, one should always start at the end. So, this is some photographs of Dad's funeral at Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C. on the 18th of December, 2001. That's the 3rd Army Honor Guard and Marching Band. 3rd Army is the oldest army in the United States that has had continuous service in the United States from 1784. Their responsibility is to bury the honorable military dead at Arlington, and they also guard the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. It was quite a ceremony, and though it was very touching and moving, it was remarkable for me. Oops, sorry, I'm going to go back one. Up until that day in December, to me, my father had been a wonderful, albeit fairly strict father, who had grown up in Denmark. He was a retired Army officer with lots of medals. I remember that. Some great war stories. He had met my mom during the war. She was a Canadian. She was living in Oshawa, and while he was training at Camp X, he ended up meeting the Henry family. My dad had really bad knees. He walked with either 1 cane or 2 canes from all the parachute jumping he did. He was a great cook, and he loved food. And as my friends will recall, he could pack it away. If a recipe called for a cup of sugar, a cup of butter, and a cup of cream, he'd say, "Well, let's just do 3 of each. It would be better." But what I learned that day, what I experienced that day at Arlington National Cemetery, was that my father's military career was so much more than I had imagined. With the attendance at the graveside of the Ambassador of Denmark and his military attaches, the Norwegian military attaché as well, the Deputy Director of the CIA, the Undersecretary of Defense of the United States of America, all present speaking remarkable things about a man who hadn't been in uniform in 38 years. How they remembered him, I don't know. There too were officers and senior NCOs in attendance graveside representing all of his former Army units, the 101st, 82nd, and 12th Airborne Divisions, the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, the 187th Airborne Regiment, known as the Rockesons from Korea, and dressed in very nice suits with overcoats, several CIA agents who had just heard about my dad and wanted to be there. I realized at that moment that I knew very little about the man, and I needed to know more. So I started doing research. So I'm going to do a little family history here. Don't worry, it's not going to get too involved. But that really handsome, fun-looking guy on the left, his name is, he's my great-grandfather. He is Danish merchant sea captain Franz Julius Sorensen, also known as Revolver Sorensen. Yeah, there's the story that we would learn about later. I think I'll touch on that story a little bit later, but we'll return to that. On the top right, that is from the mid 1864. That is the gentleman on the top row, second from the left. That is, let me get his right name here, Lieutenant Frederick Leif Julius Sorensen, and they were members of the Danish Army Regiment that fought in the Holstein Wars against Germany in 1864. And then down at the bottom, that is my grandfather on board his ship, the Hecla, in 1918, the year my dad was born. So let's just go back to this Revolver Sorensen fella. So Captain Sorensen had 3 ships that he serviced through the Baltic Seas, through Scandinavia, and even as far down as the North Africa, providing goods for Europe. On one occasion in the mid 1880s, he had a mutiny on board, and being a good stern captain, shot 3 of the mutineers, killing one of them. He was obligated, so he quelled the mutiny. He was obligated to report this at the first port of call, which was Portsmouth, England. He was put on trial for murder, but he was acquitted because of the facts. But what happened was he got this nickname, Revolver Sorensen. And then for the next couple of years, he could not hire sailors because they were hearing, he's the guy that shoots his crew. So the business was going through down the drain. So he decided that he was going to change his last name. And he took his mother's maiden name, Bunks, and his father's mother's maiden name, Boll, put them together, and Bangsboll. So for about a year, it was Sorensen - Bangsboll, dropped it, it was just Bangsboll, and the business picked up again. So, so as a kid, having that story that you got a relative named Revolver Sorensen is cool. Kind of over the years, I didn't really believe it, but then in 2009, I had a chance to go to Denmark, meet my cousin, Danish cousin there, and we went to the archives to do some research on the book. And she goes, "Hey, look at this! Come over." And there, sure enough, there was an article in the newspaper that's saying, "Captain Revolver Sorensen has been acquitted." I said, "My God, it's true." So yeah, it's just a. So this is kind of neat stuff. Part of the research we were doing while we were in the archives in Copenhagen, this was the other aha moment, the eureka moment, where my cousin leaned over and she goes, "You won't believe this, but I think we're related to royalty." So as it turned out, King Harold Bluetooth Gormson on the left there, he was the king of Denmark and Norway from 958 to 985 AD, and he was known as the Great Communicator, and he was the Danish king who brought Christianity to Denmark. Known as the Great Communicator because he was according to what I read, a very intelligent man. And when you think about Vikings, you don't think intelligence, you think brute force. But what he did was, through good communications, he got the tribes together to work together, and they were more powerful. And that's why he became a more powerful king, because he got collaboration. Having said that, the gentleman on his right, who's a little scary looking, that's his son. His name is Sven Forkbeard. And Sven was more the brute force guy. And as it turned out, in the year, sorry, I'm looking here, 985, Sven Forkbeard usurped his father's throne in the field of battle, leaving his dad dying on the field of battle, and he became the new king of Denmark and Norway. Sven also went on, and this is the real aha moment. I did not realize this was a fact, But Sven later in 1013 invaded England, and on the 25th of December, 1013, he became the first Viking king of England, which is pretty crazy. You don't read about that much in the history books, but I have subsequently looked, and I found that it is true. In fact, his reign only lasted 30 days. He was murdered in his sleep in his new castle in London. So short but sweet, but it's true. So back to Bluetooth. Here's a little bit of factoid here. In 1994, Swedish scientist Jaap Hartson invented and patented the short-range wireless technology known as Bluetooth. Professor Hartson created the Bluetooth symbol by merging the initials of Harold Bluetooth, HB, and that's the Bluetooth symbol based on his initials. All right, so now we're going to swing back into getting into more about my dad's early upbringing, and then we'll get into his military career. So the first story about my father, he was only 8 weeks old. So it's a story about him. It's not something he did, but it just is symbolic of his whole life. Things happened to him that were extraordinary. So he's 8 weeks old. His father, my grandfather Frederick, is a sea captain in the Danish Navy. He commands a flotilla of 3 submarines and a support ship. So 2 weeks after my dad's born, Frederick is sent out to patrol the North Sea. It's during the First World War, though Denmark is neutral. He still has a job to defend the shores of Denmark. He's expected to be out for a month, and now 6 weeks go by, he gets frustrated, and he decides to take things into his own hands. So he sends a cable back to Copenhagen to my grandmother and says, it's time for our son to meet God. Please come to the naval base, Pier number 6, on Sunday morning. Be there at 6:30 in the morning. She thinks it's a little weird, but she thinks he's coming back to her. So on that Sunday morning, the driver comes, picks up my grandmother, drives into the naval base, and she goes to Pier 6, which is way down the inlet of the harbor, very close to the open sea, where most of the ships come down to Pier 1, which is right in the harbor. So it was kind of strange that it was off to this distant place. But she's waiting for the ship to come in and getting very impatient. And the Padres, my grandfather arranged the Padre to be there to help her through this trauma. And his ship does not arrive. But moments later, a submarine raises out of the water in the harbor, pulls up, and she is escorted with the baby onto the submarine, then a 5-hour ride out to the North Atlantic to rendezvous with my grandfather's ship. They get out. My grandfather had arranged to have the christening of his son on board the ship, and all 42 members of the ship's crew are his godfathers. So that's how he started his life. At 8 weeks old, that's the first event in his life. So it kind of went like that for the rest of his life. So, born the 21st of July, 1918 in Copenhagen to Frederick and Rigmor Bangsboll, Leif's first adventure occurred, as I said, mere 8 weeks old. The years that followed were fairly turbulent, at least the next 10 years. By age 12, Leif had endured much. Aside from the adventures of being secreted out of Copenhagen in the submarine, less than 2 months of age, he lost both his sisters to meningitis before they were the age of 5, and then he lost his mother when he was 10. So there, at the age of 12, in the year 1930, he's left with a father who's a sea captain, and he's not fit to be a father in that sense. He's a sea captain. He doesn't know how to raise a kid. So he does what any father would do. He tries to make arrangements to send him to a very good school. And he puts him in a boarding school. At that time, my dad is mad at the world. He's lost both his sisters, his mom. He hates his dad because his dad was at sea. on an adventure in Greenland while his mom died of tuberculosis. So this 12-year-old is a very angry young man. He does very well, very, very poorly in school. Academically, he gets in fights, he doesn't do his work. So that year, at the end of that school year, he's expelled. So my grandfather does the only thing that a good sea captain does. He takes his 12-year-old son to sea. And so for the next year, the 12-year-old is aboard the ship on the far right. That's the HDMS Hecla. And then the submarine below, this 12-year-old spent 2 months on that ship patrolling the Atlantic as well. I'll talk about the ship on the top left there. That's the Danborg. It's a 3-masted sailing ship, which my dad ended up sailing to Greenland later on in life. But that's a story we'll get to a little bit later. So there is the young fella when he was a sailor in the Danish Navy, 12 years old. That experience at sea for that year changed his life. It changed his perspective of life. It was not just about, what he learned was not just about being concerned for myself. It was about being part of a crew, protect the ship. Protect the ship, that means we'll protect the crew. So it was all about teamwork and not about himself. And that was a lesson I think he took to his grave. That was important. So I mentioned that 3-masted ship, and you can see it in the background there. That's in Thule Bay in Thule, Greenland. That's in 1935, where my dad was given the opportunity to go and support Ernest Shackleton's Arctic expedition to Ellesmere Island in Canada and Greenland. So those photographs were very, very important to Dad because of all the places he went and all the things he did, Thule was, I think, his most favorite place of all. So that's Shackleton there, and it's hard to read on the left there, but that's a letter Shackleton sent to my dad, who was only 17 at the time. He was going back to school in Denmark. He sent my dad a letter saying he was going to be visiting Denmark in a few months. Would he like him to come and do a lesson for his school? And at the very bottom it says, "I'm looking forward to a dog bite." And dog bite in Danish naval terms is a drinking game. So yeah, it's kind of fun. And that's yours truly up there. That's on the top of Mount Dundas in Thule, Greenland, and that's a cairn to the man on the right, who's Knut Rasmussen, who is not technically a family member, but my father referred to him as Uncle Knut because he was a very good friend of my grandfather's. And it was with Knut that my grandfather was exploring when his wife passed away. So there's a lot of tension there. So there's a couple of photos of the old fella. On the left, he's just graduated from the Maritime Naval Academy in Denmark. And those are some of his passport photos in the late 30s and early 40s. Let's get going here. So those are images of Dunkirk. So how did my dad land in Dunkirk, of all places? So let's go back a bit for a minute. In July 1938, Leif, now 20 years old, he's a graduate of the Danish Maritime Academy. He's an ensign in the Danish Merchant Navy, and he begins his career sailing across the Atlantic. On the 7th of April 1940, Leif and his crew on the SS Bergensford depart the German dock of Rostock. The date is the 7th of April. It's important because on the 9th of April, Germany invades Denmark and Norway. So Dad was in Germany 2 days before the war started, and he's at sea when it occurs. And now their ship, being a Norwegian ship crewed by mostly Danes, they can't go back to Denmark, they can't go back to Norway, so they are basically stateless. So they deliver their cargo to Le Havre, and then they go to the last destination was New York City. They deliver their cargo there, and they sat there for about 3 weeks idle because they didn't know what to do. Eventually they get a cable saying from the British Royal Admiralty saying that their ship has been confiscated by and will be now part of the British Maritime Navy. So they're ordered to come back to England, to Portsmouth. They arrive on the 30th of May to Portsmouth, England. They anchor there, and that date's important because that's the beginning of Dunkirk. We have over 600,000 British and Allied troops stuck on the beaches of Dunkirk being bombarded by Germans, and because of the shallow water, large ships can't get in to rescue them. So the king orders that the British king orders that the small crafts of the country must band together and help. So they start sending convoys over to pick up 10, 20, 30, 40 soldiers at a time and bring them back to safety. So Dad and his crew don't really know that. They're just learning that, but he starts to get the gist of it. They anchor their ship, and they're walking into town for dinner and have a beer or whatever, because they've been at sea for so long. And Dad notices that there's a lot of these small boats gearing up and going out of the harbor. And then after dinner, he comes back and he sees the harbor's pretty well empty, except there's one boat there, and they've got spotlights on it, and they're working on the engine trying to fix it. Well, my dad's a maritime engineer. He goes down and offers to help. And within an hour, he's fixed their boat, and they're about to head off, and they say, "Hey, you want to come with us? We're going to go rescue some soldiers." And he goes, "Why not? Sounds good." It was pretty horrific. They end up joining a convoy of about 45 other small boats with one destroyer protecting them and leading them over to Dunkirk. They go in and they rescue 25 British soldiers and 4 sailors who were on a tugboat that had been struck by a German artillery. And so they ended up bringing 29 survivors back to England. And that was it. 24 hours later, he's back in Portsmouth, and he realizes, you know what? I just can't go back to being the old sailor in the engine room anymore. I got to get into this fight. So he goes to the Danish embassy in London, and then over to the Norwegian embassy, and arrangements are made through telegraphs back to Denmark. And the next thing you know, Leif has been authorized to join the Norwegian Air Force. Because Denmark does not have an air force, and their navy is prohibited from going to sea because the Germans have control over it. But he doesn't realize that to train with the Norwegian Air Force, he's going to come all the way to Canada, because Canada was in charge of the British Commonwealth Air Training Program, which trained 127,000 pilots and aircrew here in Canada. And the two reasons that is, first of all, Canada is far away from the war, both from the European War and the Pacific War. And we have great weather, especially out in the western provinces, for flying, where the sun, days are clear. So he comes all the way to Toronto, and he's at the Little Norway, which is the Toronto Island Airport, and he trains as a pilot. So that's a picture of him there. Nice shorts, kind of geeky. And that up at the top right, that's the Denmark one. One of the Norwegian engineers felt sorry for him because he was the only Dane on the Norwegian squadron, and he was. I'm sure it was pretty brutal because there's a lot of rivalry between Denmark and Norway anyway. So he came out to his plane one day and they painted that on. He thought it was pretty cool. And the photo at the bottom, that's the commanding officer of the Norwegian Air Force at the Toronto at Little Norway. And what's happening there is he's just got his wings as a fighter pilot. He's then given a letter from the Norwegian Air Force releasing him from the Air Force. And he's given a second letter, and it's from the U.S. Department of War. He's being hired to be U.S. Army soldier, but really he's being hired to be an agent with the OSS. And what is the OSS? The Office of Strategic Services. You've heard of the SOE for the British, the Strategic Operation Executive, basically the precursor of MI6 and the CIA. So that gentleman there is Colonel Wild Bill Donovan, and he had the direct orders from the President of the United States to recruit those special people that could be agents. And when they say special, it was everything from actors to pilots and engineers, to doctors. They wanted people that could think on their feet. Actors were great because they could fake what they had to be. Because when you're a spy or an agent, you need to lie, and if you're an actor, you're used to just pretending. In Dad's case, Colonel Donovan had interviewed him. He'd heard a lot of good things about my dad through his exploits at Camp X. So, or what he would be doing at Camp X. So what happened then is he has an interview with Colonel Donovan, who's basically poaching people from Allied soldiers, trying to get the best of the best to come be an agent with him. So he looks at life and he goes, okay, you're a maritime engineer. Now you're a qualified fighter pilot. You speak 5 languages, Danish, Norwegian, German, French, and English. It caught the colonel's attention. And during the interview, Flight Sergeant Bangsboll, Donovan notes the young man's deep desire to get into the war because he's got his father in Denmark that's occupied by the Nazis. He wants to get there to help free him. So Donovan says, how would you like to fight the Germans in Denmark? And Leif returns by saying, I could not want anything more, but Denmark's capitulated. They're not in the fight. Donovan says, they soon will be, and I want you to be part of that fight. And then he says to him, do you know what an OSS field agent does? Says Donovan. And Leif says, I haven't a clue. Donovan replies, perfect. We'll teach you everything you need to know. So, Whitby, Ontario, that's Lake Ontario at the top. That's Camp X from above. It's about 200 acres, beautiful land. That's where they trained all of the British and American secret agents in the war. There's some interesting facts about it. This aerial view of a top secret site known as S25-1-1, also known as Special Training School 103, also known as Project J, also known as Military Research Center Number 2, also known as The Farm, and finally known as Camp X. So there's the military. If they want to confuse you, that's how they do it. They name something 5 different things, and it'll trick somebody. So anyhow, that's Camp X, and many Canadians had no idea it was there. Most Canadians did. During this time at Camp X, he will end up meeting my grandmother, Margaret Henry, who's a Red Cross volunteer working at the prisoner of war camp number 30, which is at Bowmanville, which is about 10 kilometers away. And that's important because that's how he ends up meeting my mom, who at the time is only 15 and my dad's 25, so it's a little scary, but they don't date until after the war, but that's where he met her, when she was 15 and he was 25. Leif develops a very close relationship to Margaret and her husband, Clifford. Clifford fought in the First World War with the Canadian Army, 18 months in the trenches, Ypres, Passchendaele, Vimy Ridge, and Hill 70. Spending 18 months in the trenches, he came back a broken man, became an alcoholic, not abusive, but he was an alcoholic for the rest of his life. He never returned to what he was. He left to the war. He was in his second year university at U of T, and he came back an old man. It was tragic, but to his credit, he supported my grandmother for years, and he was furious that she was volunteering at a German prisoner of war camp because he hated them. But there's an interesting story that I'm going to tell you right now that that is not in the book. It was in the original book, so I'm just going to bear with me here. This particular model here, this is the battleship Scharnhorst, German battleship. It was produced by a German sailor, one of only 36 survivors of the sinking of that ship. So on December 26th, 1943, the British battle cruiser Duke of York were in position in the northern part of, off the northern coast of Norway, where they were positioned as the sun was coming up. It was right behind them, perfect position. The German battleship came into view. When the Germans were looking at the British ship, they were blinded by the sun. So they had about 4 or 5 minutes while the sun was just cresting the horizon that the British unloaded all their weapons and destroyed the Scharnhorst. In 1968 sailors went into the water, only 36 survived. One of which was leading seaman Franz Lies. The remarkable thing about this sailor, he worked in the engine room, which is in the very bowels of the ship. So when that ship went down within about 6 minutes of being struck, somehow that young man survived. So he finds himself at Camp 30 in Bowmanville, Ontario. He meets my grandmother, who's delivering care packages for the soldiers and getting them books and getting them little pieces of string and paint so they could do hobbies. But producing something like that is contraband. So when that model was finished, the Corporal Lies was being transferred up to another prisoner of war camp near North Bay. He didn't want the Canadian soldiers to get that, so he wrapped it up in newspaper and he stuffed it in the garbage. But an on-duty Canadian guard saw it happen, and when all the prisoners went off for dinner to the chow hall, he went over and retrieved that, wondering what it was that this prisoner had hidden. And he saw it, and he said, "Oh, I better bring this to the camp commandant." And the camp commandant looked at it and they put it in the mess, and that's where it sat for near 2 years. Where the story ends, at the end of the war, where my grandmother had done a lot of great things for the camp, not only helping the German soldiers a bit. She'd play the piano. She's a very accomplished piano player. Played that at the officers' mess and at the senior NCO's mess. So at the end of the war, the camp commandant presented her with that as a gift of thanks. She loved it because of the sentimentality of it, but she had to hide it and sneak it into the house because she knows if her husband had have seen that, he would have gone apoplectic. So from 1945 to I think about 1970, that sat in her attic covered in a blanket and dust. And it was only then that my grandmother gave it to my brother Chris, who's the oldest male grandchild, and he was in the Navy, so she thought he should have it. So I asked him to bring it here tonight. So great story, but it's not in the book because it's not about my dad. And the editor said, "Great story, not about your dad. It's not going in." So anyhow, I just thought I'd throw that one by you just for fun. So where are we now? That's an image of Camp X. I think it's a fantastic photo. I liked it so much. My original book was called Onward to Valhalla, which I'll explain later, but that's what I produced. So this is really, only 30 copies were made because my whole intent when we started doing this project was to write the family history, have enough copies for family members, be done with it. So when that was done, it was done. Then some people convinced me that, well, maybe you should write it like a novel and add some dialogue between characters and turn it into something different. And that's where the second book came out. And in fact, there's 2 books because that was too long to be one book. So another long story, but I'll get to it. So that's Leif on the left, Lieutenant Bangsboll. He's at Royal Air Force Station Harrington in just north of London. The other one, he's also at the camp there. And then on the bottom right there, he's with a bunch of OSS and SOE agents in London, England. And that'll be about June 1944. So he's just getting ready to deploy into Europe and do some fighting. So again, that's Dad on the left. And the fellow on the right, interesting story. His name is Jorgen Beck. The photo was taken about 1940. My dad and he went to grade school together and went separate ways, hadn't seen each other in 10 years, and then met again back when Dad went to the Maritime Academy. Jorgen was there. Jorgen was a year ahead of him. Jorgen was brilliant with his hands. He could put together an engine and disassemble an engine or a fuel system with his eyes closed. But my dad thinks he was dyslexic because he could not pass any of the exams. So Jorgen ends up getting let go from the academy. And I'm going somewhere with the story. I'm just filling in time. Jorgen then joins the Merchant Navy, and he tells Leif when he's leaving, he says, I'm going to see if I can join the American Navy someday. All right, this is before the Americans are even in the war. So Jorgen goes off, and my dad and he communicate by letters over the couple of years. So then when my dad then graduates, he starts his career in the Merchant Navy, which I already covered earlier. So I'm just kind of reaching back to join these two. So in 1939, after my dad graduates, he's off at sea. A year later, he receives a letter from Jorgen stating that he's finally got his papers, immigration papers in the United States, and he's joined the U.S. Navy. And he was on his way from New York City to San Diego by train to conduct his training there. In the fall of 1941, Leif receives another letter from Jorgen, now officially called George Beck. So when you go to an immigration officer and you say, with a heavy Danish accent, my name is Jorgen Beck, they go, oh, George Beck, great. So his name changed to George Beck from Jorgen Beck. So in that letter, George Beck says, I've been assigned to Hawaii. I'm going to Pearl Harbor, and my ship is the USS Arizona. So in February 1941, Leif receives a return to sender letter, a letter he had sent to Jorgen. It's sent back to him saying, remember, not here anymore. So Jorgen was killed on December 7th, 1941 on the USS Arizona. And I verified that because there is a George Beck leading seaman on the monument here in Pearl Harbor. So that's an important story, not only because of that loss of a close friend, but you'll learn later why it's very important to my dad's next career as a secret agent, because he needs a secret identity. He needs an identity that he knows everything about, and when his OSS supervisor wants to give him an identity, he goes, no, I got it already. I'm Jorgen Beck. I know everything about him. The fact that he was killed in halfway around the world, the Germans will never know. I know everything about him. That's who I'll be when I be a secret agent, and that's what he did. So that is a B-24 Liberator. It's painted black, which is unusual because they were used for special operations. Most of them are camouflaged in green. That's at Royal Air Force Harrington. That's where all the special operations went out of from that base. So whenever they were sending agents into Europe, they were coming out of that place. So that is United States Army Air Force B-24 Liberator, named Lucky Playmate, tail number 4263980 of the 429th Bombardment Group Special Operations Wing at RF Station Harrington, October 1944. Leif Bangsboll, known as Agent Alexander Hudson, OSS support agent, now transforms into Agent Jorgen Beck, OSS field agent. And he will masquerade in Denmark as a Danish maritime insurance broker in the small town of Aarhus. That's his cover story, and that's where the real interesting stories start to unravel in this book. So I'm going to take a moment and read you an excerpt from the book. So, standing near that aircraft on the evening of the 6th of October, this is what was going through my dad's head. Before entering the black behemoth, Leif took one last look down the long, dark runway. The lights illuminating the runway were off and were not illuminated until just prior to takeoff. It was a cool evening, but he felt himself perspiring heavily. Leif approached the open belly hatch of the massive black aircraft and craned his neck to peer inside the aircraft and lifted his parachute and small suitcase into the aircraft's fuselage. The B-24s assigned to support Operation Carpetbagger had been modified to accommodate the special needs of their cargo. The usual green and brown camouflage paint applied to most Allied aircraft was replaced by flat black paint to reduce the aircraft's visibility at night, and since virtually every special operation was a midnight run, it made sense. Most B-24s also had their belly gun turret removed, and that became the hatch. The hatch was also known as the Joe hole. The reason it's called the Joe hole is that the aircrew weren't to know who these people are, who they're the soldiers that are getting on, so they were all referred to as Joes and James. So the entrance to the aircraft is the Joe hole. For the crew of the Lucky Playmate, tonight's mission was to deliver just one more Joe, along with 4 containers of military equipment to the Danish resistance in Jutland. So, on the 6th of October, 1944, the Lucky Playmate drops 4 of those containers. You can see the container right here in the bottom here. Those are Danish resistance workers picking up, and those containers are full of weapons, radios, first aid kits, ammunition, explosives that they will use to disrupt the German occupiers. Fine looking couple over there, that's Olaf and Ragla Gustafsson. When my dad jumped out of the aircraft, it was late at night. He made a perfect landing, but he made a perfect landing on top of their barn, which was a thatch-covered barn. And Olaf heard him coming down, came out with a shotgun and said, "Okay, why are you here?" And then this is the conversation that then happens. After discussing the reason my dad was there, and they conversed in Danish, so he got the trust of Olaf. Olaf says to him, "So what are you waiting for, soldier? Go find your colleagues," Olaf said, and again motioned the shotgun in the direction of the adjacent field. "I will dispose of your parachute for you." He then added, "If for some reason you do not meet up with your colleagues or your reception party, come back here and we will shelter you." Leif replied, "Tak," which is thank you in Danish. Leif moved off silently into the darkness of the field beside Olaf's farmhouse. With his suitcase in one hand and his pistol in the other, Leif walked approximately 200 yards. His eyes now adapted to the darkness when he spotted a large white shape contrasted on the dark soil of the followed field. It was a parachute draped over one of his supply cylinders he had just dropped before, from his aircraft. Leif ran to the cylinder and immediately disconnected the parachute and began to roll up the parachute to hide it, while scanning the surroundings. The resupply cylinder had landed 20 yards from the edge of the field that was outlined by trees and hedges. Though it would be difficult to detect him from the adjacent road because of the vegetation, the same vegetation blocked Leif from seeing anybody approaching. He did not like standing there in the open, exposed, so he knelt and began to scrape a hole in the ground to hide the parachute. Suddenly, Leif was alerted by a sudden noise. People. People were near, very near. Leif instinctively stopped, turned towards the approaching threat. Adhering to his training, he lowered himself and raised the weapon. Before he had time to react, Leif clearly heard the distinctive sound of a rifle bolt's action being manually brought back and then forward, inserting a bullet into the firing chamber. Somebody nearby had just prepared his weapon to fire. Leif froze in place, instinctively lowered himself further behind the aluminum container to make himself a smaller target, and he drew his gun up and forward to the ready position. Several seconds passed. Then a voice from the darkness in the tree line said, "Hervan de Hu, who are you?" This was not the code phrase Leif was hoping to hear. Using the designated mission code phrase the OSS handler had given him just prior to entering the aircraft that evening, he responded to the shapeless voice in the darkness. "Onward to Valhalla, he said, and waited. Moving his index finger now onto the trigger, ready to fire. A few agonizing seconds passed, and then the voice from the darkness responded, where Odin awaits his Viking sons. So that was the response to the secret code. So Leif could relax, and he had been met by his Danish reception party. So I thought I'd just quickly orientate you. So that all in yellow is Denmark there. Copenhagen's way over here. Where Dad's dropped in, this is called Jutland. And the reason it was important to control Jutland because the Germans and all their supplies are coming up through here and then going there and back to there. So his area of operation was right here, right where that transport hub is. Makes sense. So when he was parachuted into the town of Skye, he spent the next 10 months working in that area, blowing up trains, blowing up rail yards, chasing down bad guys, and eliminating traitors, which was the toughest part of his job. Okay. So there's just a couple images of what life under the Gestapo was like in Denmark. And there's a photo of one of the trains that isn't one of Dad's events, but that's an image of one where a German supply train had been blown up. So this is a fake image that I created when I got to part of the book that I was starting to write, the last chapter of the book about the culmination of the end of the war. I needed something visual to talk about, so this is a particular map that I was able to secure. It's actually a map of 1945 Copenhagen, and up here is a camp called Rijwegen. That's where the German had their largest troops that control, because all the roads and railways came through here. So the Germans had their largest troop centric right there at the garrison called Rijwegen. And these two arrows here, that represents where two units that Dad had, one here and one here, encircled the camp and attacked it. And I'll get into the details there. So the image there, got to throw the bottle of aquavit in there. It's a Danish schnapps. It appears, I think, 36 times in my book. Dad used it. He loved to drink, but he loved to get guys drunk, and then he could take advantage of it by doing stuff. So, and that's the armband of the Danish resistance there. That's a cigarette case that was given to my grandfather from the King of Denmark at one point. So really, technically, that shouldn't be there because he didn't give it to him until after the war, but I thought it was cool to have it there. So anyhow, that's leading us up to the end of, just about the end of the war. So that's a picture of my dad there. You can see he's got his Danish resistance armband there. This is in Copenhagen, and that's his partner, Carl Svens, who is one of the, is also an OSS agent that was working with my dad. That's Grandpa Bangsboll and my dad, and this is, so the war is now over. This is about the 9th or 10th of May. They hadn't seen each other in 5 years. And that's the celebration party at the end of the war. That's all OSS and SOE agents in Denmark celebrating. It's my dad in the middle there, looking very happy. And this is very important. This is Dad getting his Distinguished Service Cross from the commander of the OSS, which is the second highest medal you can earn in the United States, next to the Medal of Honor. And now that's my mom when she's now 18, not 15 anymore. So when my dad came back after the war, she'd grown up a little bit. So he had a pocket full of money because he'd been in combat for over a year. So he had a lot of back pay, so he bought this Ford Deluxe coupe, canary yellow though, but my mom seemed to enjoy it. Late in March 1945, as Dad was operating in Jutland, he gets ordered by the OSS to move himself into Copenhagen because the war is getting close to the end. They want him there. They know that's where the fighting's going to be. So he moves into Copenhagen, and this is the citation, or a portion of the citation, for the Distinguished Service Cross. So, late in March 1945, First Lieutenant Bangsboll was transferred from Aarhus, Jutland, to Copenhagen, Denmark, to lead similar sabotage activities in the capital. During the fighting between the Danish resistance forces and the German garrison that took place in the city on the first days of May 1945, First Lieutenant Bangsboll conduct was marked by gallantry and courage of the highest order. On the morning of the 5th of May, resistance forces attacked the German garrison at Rivegen camp, a position that controlled the main road and railway entrance to Copenhagen from the north, in which the Nazis occupied. The forces under First Lieutenant Bangsboll command, under heavy fire from two 42mm enemy guns and at a range of 200 yards. These guns were supported by two additional light machine guns positions on either side. Realizing the futility of further advance, First Lieutenant Bangsboll ordered his men to take cover and provide covering fire for him. Then, with complete disregard for his own life, he rose and crossed the 250 yards of open ground under intense enemy fire, making his way to a group of buildings where a strong resistance force sheltered in place, withering away from the fire themselves. Rallying these men, First Lieutenant Bangsboll then took forward those personnel, led an attack which penetrated the flank of the enemy and permitted direct fire to be brought to the 42mm gun positions from the rear. After intense close-quarter engagement, realizing that their position was hopeless, both the German crews of the 42mm guns and those manning the smaller supporting machine guns surrendered. This in turn resulted in the surrender of the entire German garrison. This order is signed by General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Commander. So that's basically the story of the first book. I'll give you a hint on where the second book's going, but just to give you a couple of points here about Eureka moments, I think I might have covered a few of them. Obviously, the funeral at Arlington was an Eureka moment for me, learning about my dad. The bit about Revolver Sorensen, again, finding out that was actually true, changed my whole opinion. Learning about the Bluetooth, King Harold Bluetooth being an ancestor, and his fun son who stole his crown. Now, the KGB incident, Berlin, that's a story my dad never told me. So when I had first finished my first draft of the book, I'd sent it to my brothers to read, and got a lot of constructive criticism back. But my brother Mark immediately picked up the phone and said, "Hey, you didn't mention the KGB incident." I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." So he filled me in on this, and without giving it away, a very interesting, very challenging event right at the end of the war. So if you could imagine, it's now August 1945. Germany has been defeated. Dad has finished all his work in London. He's sent back to Washington, D.C., but he's due to have leave. He's been in combat for near 18 months. So with that pocket full of money and the new car, Dad goes up to Oshawa, Ontario to the Henry family, like he promised he'd come back to, and he meets my mom. But more importantly, while he's there, on the 20th of August, Japan surrenders. So Dad was getting prepared to go to the Pacific theater of war to fight again. So much to his relief and to the relief of many millions of Allied troops, they didn't have to go into the Pacific. So Dad's thrilled. 5 days later, he's given a telegram from OSS headquarters in Washington, ordering him immediately to return to Washington because there's concern about what the Russians are doing in occupied Germany, and they think Leif Bangsboll, Agent Beck, is perfectly suited to go back into occupied Germany less than 5 weeks after the end of the war. So that's your hint of where the next book goes to. I threw the Stop the Press in there as just an interesting aside. Last November, I was due to submit the final copy of my book, the first book, to Pen and Sword, my publisher in the UK. And it was about the 28th of November, and I was done. I was going to press send, but I said, no, it doesn't have to be until the end of the month, I'll wait. The next day, I got an email from Bradley, my nephew, saying, Uncle Brook, I got this weird email from somebody down in the States trying to figure out if we're related to Bubba. That's what we called my dad. So Brad sends me the contact information, and I contact this lady. And her mom had met my dad in New York City in 1942. And the crazy thing was she scanned the photo and she sent me this photo of my dad and a whole bunch of OSS friends at a wedding in Virginia. But it's a photo I put in my book. She sent it to me. She goes, well, that's my mom and my dad there. In my book, I put, okay, there's my dad, Leif, and his friend Frank, and I just put unknown individuals on the other people because I had no idea who they were. This woman, out of the blue, comes back. She's got the photo. She goes, oh, I can tell you who they are. That's my mom. That's my dad. I said, geez, that was perfect. So I got to send an email to my publisher saying, hold the presses, which you don't get to do much in your life. And I said, I got to add this information to the book because it just came to me. So I just thought that was great. And I'm now communicating with the lady, and I sent her a copy of the book, and she's thrilled. So the connections were kind of unique and quite amazing. So that was another eureka moment for me. As we wind down, we're getting close to the witching hour. I'll just go through a couple other things here. Leif Johansson. So I guess he was just practicing being an agent. Saying, okay, he's an agent, I'm going to this guy. But she obviously liked it. This is really interesting. I don't get into this until the second book, but just as a bit of a spoiler. In 1963, just a couple weeks before my dad retired from the American Army, he decided that he was going to write a book about his life. And he only got 14 pages of it. Wow. But we got them, and we found them. We didn't know this existed, but when my dad passed away on the 20th of November 2001, my brother Chris was cleaning out some of his papers. He phoned me. I was back in Winnipeg, and he says, "You won't believe what I found. I found a manuscript from Dad." So I used that as a bit of inspiration, but it had a couple of great lines in it. So it was just kind of fun to have that as something to follow on. We've got his medals there that are kind of fun. But it's one thing that my brother and I keep saying to each other. It's just, Dad he's like the Energizer Bunny. He's been dead for 23 years, and he just keeps appearing and stuff. So in 2019, he was recognized by the United States Special Operations Command. Those are the Special Forces guys that were really tough guys. They put him into the Commando Hall of Fame. So that was amazing. And then out of the blue last year, I'm at a conference and I'm talking to this woman from South Korea. She's at the embassy, and somebody says, "Oh, you should tell her about your book." So I started telling her the book. She wasn't so interested in this part of the book, but as soon as I mentioned the Korean War, she immediately tuned in. And the next thing I know, I was invited to Banff, and Dad got a medal from the Korean government to again thank him for his service in the Korean War. So it just keeps coming on. I just don't know. So anyhow, it's a never-ending story. So wrapping up. His legacy, that's my dad in the middle there. That's the last time he wore his uniform before we buried him, at least in it. The gentleman third from the left is Captain Bryce Morwick, my nephew. So he would be my dad's first grandchild. So that's at his wedding, and that's just, at that time, those are all the members of our family that were in service in uniform. So that's a bit of the legacy. You see my older brother there on the left, and the rest of us, my brother Mark there, third from the right. So that's him getting the medal down posthumously. I was going to tell you the Miss Sophie story. Have I got 5 minutes? Or should I wrap it?
Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
I know Kathy wanted me to do the Sophie story, right, Kathy?
Pardon me?
You wanted me to do the Sophie story, didn't you?
Sure.
All right. So let me give you the background of where this comes in. So think back to October 1944. Dad has jumped into Jutland near the town of Skye. He's working out of the town of Aarhus. He goes down to the town of Horsen, where he has some of his resistance troops, and one of the resistance leaders is a local banker. And that's the neat thing, if you don't know about it. Resistance members are local people. It's the banker, the baker, the doctor, you name it. At night, they become soldiers, and they do sabotage against the Germans as best they can. So Dad has only been in country about a month, so he's still getting to know the leaders. So he goes down to meet this individual, I believe his name is Fletcher. So let me just collect my thoughts here. So he's in having coffee with Fletcher the first time he's meeting him. They're in a public area, so they know they have to speak very carefully. Dad is there working in Jutland, away from Copenhagen, because he would be known in Copenhagen as Leif Bangsboll, but he isn't Leif Bangsboll anymore. He's Jorgen Beck, so he has to be away from where people know him. They sit down for coffee. Their waitress comes over, looks at him, goes, "Leif, what are you doing here?" It's his old girlfriend from Copenhagen. Her parents moved her out of Copenhagen to Horsen to get her away from the Nazi occupation. So she's living with her aunt and uncle. And Fletcher, who my dad's working with, is going, "She knows you. This is not good." And my dad calmly says, "Look, this is an important banking meeting." And she realizes that he's the local banker. So he says, "I'll come back tonight, and how about we go out for dinner?" She goes, "Okay, that'd be great." So she leaves. Mr. Fletcher, the banker, says, "Mr. Beck, my dad, she's a collaborator. Her nephew, or her cousin was captured by the Gestapo, is in jail just in the next town. She is dating a German officer in the hopes, we believe, that he's gonna give favor to her and help get her cousin out of the Gestapo jail early, or with a lesser penalty or what have you. This is bad, because if she knows you, we're in trouble." So let me read from the book, and that'll tell you exactly what happened. Fletcher was certain that Sophie was vulnerable and susceptible to coercion by the Germans, and that she was desperate enough to do anything to save her cousin Sven. She had been seen on numerous occasions in the company of a German officer named Captain Manfred Trautmann, fraternizing with the enemy. It was Fletcher's opinion that Sophie was a willing collaborator looking for a bargaining chip to offer the Germans for her cousin's release, or at least a less severe punishment. Secondly, Sophie had recognized Beck by his true identity, Leif Bangsboll, and she could destroy his cover story with a casual misspoken word to her German boyfriend about running into an unexpected old friend who was using a false name to hide his identity, which would have been immediately arrested everyone involved, and probably worse. The potential ramification for the Horsen and region resistance network were grave as well. Anyone who had any contact with the imposter Jorgen Beck, Leif Bangsboll, would be hunted down and questioned by the Gestapo. For that matter, anyone who had any contact with Sophie Halverson would also be assumed to be a potential member of the resistance. The Gestapo did not care. They would kill you because they did not care. As they sat in the car, later that evening, as Jorgen Beck and Fletcher sat in the car, Leif and Fletcher reviewed their plan. Leif went over to the restaurant as Sophie was finishing her work, as he promised, and was going to take her out for dinner. Fletcher sat in the car, waiting another 2 minutes, and then put the Opel into gear. He caught up with Sophie and Leif a few streets away. He slowed down as his vehicle came alongside the couple. He leaned over and rolled down the passenger window and greeted the two individuals warmly, offering them a lift to wherever they were going. With a smile and a nod of his head towards the car, Leif looked at Sophie and said, "Shall we?" With a casual gesture of his hand, Leif led Sophie into the back of the car. Leif opened the door for her and thought to himself, "She is like a child. She is so naive." Sophie had no idea what circumstances she had gotten herself into. To Sophie, Hans Fletcher's sudden appearance was nothing more than a pleasant coincidence. He was a well-known banker, a businessman, and well-known to the community. And he's an acquaintance of Leif's. He must be okay. As she entered the car, Leif moved behind her and reminded himself that this was a woman who was no longer a friend, but a potential enemy, and was dangerous, mission-ending dangerous. Furthermore, he reflected, if she were caught up in the circumstances that were made, she would be desperate, and desperate people often made poor choices. There was a dangerous combination of factors at work at this situation, and Leif knew that he had to take the initiative and take it now. He had to take bold, audacious action. Horsen was a small town, and after 5 minutes of turns and twists, the Opel had reached the outskirts of the town. It was a dark, cloudy evening, and Sophie had difficulty identifying the exact location, let alone the possible destination. A few moments later, the Opel turned into a side road in a northwestern direction from Horsen towards the town of Skive. Sophie asked Fletcher, "Where are we going?" He did not reply. She turned to Leif and her trusted companion and former boyfriend with a questioning look on her face, oblivious to the gravity of her situation. Silence came from Leif. As the car continued along the dark country road, there was no response from Leif either. Fear slowly gripped Sophie. Her right hand moved instinctively towards the door handle. Leif grabbed her by the left arm firmly and spoke in a stern yet compassionate voice. "Stay calm, Sophie," he said. "If you ever want to see your family again, please stay calm." He gave her a moment to digest those words. "If you cooperate, you will see the end of the war, and we will be reunited at the end with your family. I promise. However, if you panic or try to escape, you will force us to take immediate, drastic measures." They drove her to a mental asylum where a resistant doctor, psychiatrist, claimed that she was mentally incompetent, and she was put away for the last 6 months of the war for her safety, because it was either that or kill her. No, Dad was not proud of that, but she lived. They told Sophie's parents that she was part of the resistance and that they were hiding her. They didn't realize that she was actually in this insane asylum for the last 6 months. So there you go. That's one of the cool stories. So these are the last few pictures. I chose these because this is showing a part of my dad's life that is not so much about war. That top photo, that's the one in the center, that's the photo that's in my book that Miss Cindy Thompson sent to me and said, "Yeah, that's my mom and dad on the right. That's at our wedding." So it looks like he hung out with a lot of girls in his day. I particularly like that photo on the right. He was a fun-loving guy. When he wasn't doing the business of being a soldier, he seemed like he was a fun guy. And that's my mom, bottom right, with the canary yellow Ford. And so those are the two books. The second one comes out in August. Thank you very much, Tuck. So, first up front, what do you want?
I gotta know. I just gotta know. Hitler's birthday party.
Okay. Okay, the question is Hitler's birthday party. How did that happen? Again, not of my dad's doing. He just happened to be in the right place at the right time. So I mentioned that my grandfather, at the time he's a Commodore in the Danish Navy. He's in charge of the Danish reserve fleet. He's a good friend of the king's. Because not so much the king's, he's a friend of the crown prince. They went to the military academy together. So in 1936, Hitler's birthday, so the war hasn't started, but there's dark clouds over Europe. I think it's Goebbels that sets up the party for the Fuhrer in Berlin, and everybody's invited. So President of the United States is invited. He declines. King of England's invited. Declines. Now Denmark, they're a close neighbor. Like, they border on Germany. So the king calls in my grandfather and says, Frederick, I can't go. The king cannot go to Hitler's birthday party. It would send the wrong message. But I got to send somebody. He goes, would you go for me and represent Denmark? He says, well, of course, Your Highness, I'll do that. At that time, my dad was just finishing graduating from the Maritime Academy. He had a few months off, and he was back in Copenhagen, and my grandfather invited him out and said, hey, you want to go to Berlin with me? And so they took the train to Berlin, and my dad was on the dais, probably about 150 feet away from Hitler, who was taking the salute. And I describe it in the second book. It was for my grandfather, it was monumental. For my dad, he was a young man. He was 17 years old, going, this is amazing. This is seeing these goose-stepping soldiers and planes flying over and tanks. For a young man, it was like exciting. My grandfather realized what he was seeing. He was seeing war coming to Europe right before his eyes. So the last little caveat I'll tell you to this story, which I thought was just the best thing I learned. So you have to bring a birthday gift to the birthday boy, right? So the King of England, King of Denmark, Frederick the 10th, gave my dad a portrait of the Glucksenburg Castle. And the symbolism was, the Glucksenburg Castle is a territory that Germany and Denmark had fought over for about 500 years. And after World War I, the Treaty of Versailles gave it back to Denmark, and Hitler was pissed. So he gave him a painting of his favorite castle. Nice shot across the bow. So that's how my dad got to meet Hitler. Yes, sir.
What did he do after the war was over?
Good question. So there was nobody left in my dad's family back in Denmark, sadly. So having met and married my mom, Canadian, when he retired from the U.S. Army, he had no connection to the United States, really. He had no family there. So he decided to move to Toronto, and he ended up being operations director for a security company. Do you remember Pinkerton's? Yeah, he ran Pinkerton's for the Greater Toronto area. Yeah. But he already had bad knees from all his parachute jumping, and he was at a Argo football game and got jostled by a crowd and ended up falling and really damaging one of his knees, and that was the end of his working career. So when I was about 15, he was a stay-at-home dad, and he started being the housefrau. He cooked for us, and he was a great father for that. It was kind of fun. But that's how he ended his career, unceremoniously. Any other questions out there? Your opportunity.
What happened to Miss Sophie? Did she get out of the asylum?
She did. They never met again. Surprise, surprise. But yeah, as soon as the war was over, the doctors went in and said, "You're free to go." Thinking she was probably pretty pissed, but I think over time she probably looked back and said, "Probably saved my life." And without giving too much away, her cousin Sven ended up being rescued by my dad, because one of the missions they did later was they attacked the Gestapo headquarters in the town of Aarhus, and Sven was there and was freed. So a little bit of justice there, and tit for tat. So my dad felt better that he had actually saved her cousin after all. So
Did your dad ever talk about having so many godfathers?
Oh, he loved that. He loved that. And one of the interesting facts, one of the godfathers is his name is Manfred or Manny. He was the cook on board the ship, who taught my dad how to cook. But if you can imagine feeding a crew of sailors, probably wasn't fine dining. But he learned how to cook, and it was pretty amazing. So even though when he was 12 years old on a ship, which could be a very scary, daunting place, there was always a few sailors that were, in fact, his godfather. So he had men looking after him, that he was being taken care of. But my grandfather insisted that he didn't get special treatment. And I didn't talk about it, but it's a really fascinating part. That time when my dad was on the ship, he had a duty. He was the cabin boy, and he would run errands and do laundry and all this stuff. But at night, my grandfather schooled him. Like he taught him, mathematics through navigation of sea charts, and how to navigate with a sextant using the stars. Learning about how a propulsion engine on a battleship works. You're learning engineering stuff, you're learning stuff, and then he made him read all the time. So he had to read all the Shakespearean books, Dickens and things like that. And my grandfather would quiz him, at the dinner table. And so he got a great education. It was just a different education. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us.